Guess who got brands talking? Brandlive.co.za.
You're listening to Inside OUTA.
Welcome to Inside OUTA, our weekly podcast that gives you insight into how we at OUTA promote civil activism. I'm your host, Bernadette Bule. Today, my guests are Michael Holenstein, our local government portfolio manager, as well as Dominique Msibi, who's our portfolio manager on social development. We speak to Michael about the issues in Emfuleni Local Municipality and OUTA's submission to the South African human rights. We speak to Dominique on the South African Social Development Agency and what is her stance on the current status. Stay tuned.
Demand good governance. Join us weekly on Inside OUTA.
Michael, thank you for taking the time to speak to us.
Good afternoon, Bernadette, to you and your listeners. Thanks so much for inviting me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Now let's get into it. The Emfuleni municipality has collapsed. Emfuleni is a former industrial heartland of Gauteng, which actually created employment and wealth for communities of Sebokeng, Vanderbijlpark, Vereniging, and Sharpeville. Now, failure by the provincial and national government to intervene has left Emfuleni residents facing sewage spills, electricity and water cuts with no recourse. Now, I understand that OUTA has made attempts to speak to the authorities, including Premier David Makhura, by highlighting various issues like disruption of electricity supply to Eskom, as well as the security of the water supply. It's been a total of 8 letters just in 2018 alone, with the last one as early as August. Now, Michael, why has the Emfuleni sewage problem collapsed?
Thanks, Bernadette. Just going back to the correspondence and the communications that we've had with the provincial government, the MEC for COGTA, the Treasury of the province. Basically what has happened is we've requested a financial recovery plan and an intervention to turn the municipality around, and what they've basically done is they've ignored us. And for us it's very important that there is public participation and that the community gets involved in decisions that affect them on a daily basis. Now, you ask, why has Emfuleni's sewage system collapsed? The fact of the matter is that it's because of neglect. And this goes back 10 to 12 years. And if one looks at the budget, on an annual basis, there is a budget made available for repairs and maintenance, for capital infrastructure. And what has happened is the norm, as per Treasury, is that between 8 and 10% of a municipality's budget should be spent on repairs and maintenance, especially to infrastructure. Now, what has happened is that they have only spent between 2 and 3% on repairs and maintenance for infrastructure. So you can imagine, even if you look at your own household, if you don't paint, if you don't look after the drains, if you don't look after, you're going to have a collapse of the infrastructure. And we keep on hearing that it's aged infrastructure, it's infrastructure that has been there for 30 years or 40 years. However, if you maintain that infrastructure, you can prolong the life of that infrastructure by 3 or 4 times what it was set out to do.
Sure. Okay, you talked about there being a budget set aside. Who funds this?
Well, what happens is the municipality has a budget on an annual basis, and they collect revenue from water sales, from sanitation sales, from refuse removal, from electricity sales, etc. So a portion of that, as I said, between 8 and 10% should be allocated to infrastructure, repairs and maintenance. Okay. Remember, the municipality also receives grants from national and provincial government, and those are infrastructure grants. Okay. So that is completely separate to their own budget, the municipality's own budget.
Okay, so it's over and above that, hey?
Correct.
Okay. I also understand that the Vaal River has been contaminated. What threat does this pose?
Yeah, this is something that is I believe a total collapse of caring from the municipality and from the officials that work there. what has happened is the wastewater treatment plants have failed, the pump stations have failed. So you have an issue of raw sewage flowing into the Rietspruit, the Vaal River, which obviously creates health issues.
Yeah.
It creates economic issues. Remember the Vaal River? Years ago, there were lots of tourist destinations there. There were hotels built.
Yes.
There were so it's a recreation area. Now you can imagine when people hear that there's sewage flowing into the Vaal River.
Yeah.
You're not going to have people coming to spend weekends there. You're not going to have people staying over. You're not going to have people water skiing, boating, fishing, etc. And then one can imagine that the Vaal River at some stage joins the Orange River. And we all know that the Orange River is world renowned for grapes, for fruit, etc. on the banks of the of the Orange River. And a lot of that fruit is exported. Now you can imagine the negative implications caused by this if the buyers of the fruit internationally hear that there's raw sewage going into the Vaal River, which is then in turn going into the Orange River, which is being used for irrigation to irrigate the fruit. So that again would have socioeconomic ramifications where people would lose jobs because there's nobody that wants to buy that kind of fruit.
Look, I think that is quite important because I think, look, let's stick to it being at home. On a national level in South Africa, it is a problem. We have been trying to speak to the authorities and make them know. Besides OUTA's call to the Premier, to the MEC, did the national and provincial government know about the decay in Emfuleni?
We believe they certainly did know. What one must understand is that on an annual basis, you have a 5-year IDP, but this gets updated on an annual basis. So you have an IDP, which is your integrated development plan, which falls into the national development plan and the provincial development plans for development in a particular municipality. And on a monthly basis, a municipality must submit financial statements, they must submit management reports, etc., to Treasury, provincial as well as national. So these are things that we believe provincial and national authorities have been aware of for many, many years. There's an organization that has taken the province to court. They have, I think there are 2 or 3 court interdicts. And the municipality is in contempt of court because they have not fulfilled the conditions of those interdicts.
So this is actually a human rights violation, and I understand that OUTA has submitted a submission or commission to the South African Human Rights Commission, calling the situation as a humanitarian disaster. Now, what role can the Human Rights Commission play in bringing this issue to the forefront?
Right. We made a submission to the Human Rights Commission as well as a number of other interested and affected parties down in the Vaal. And what we're calling for is that the Vaal Triangle is declared a national disaster area. Now, in terms of the Disaster Management Act, there are funds available from the National Disaster Fund. And we believe that that this issue requires urgent intervention from national government because it not only affects people in Emfuleni, it affects people in the greater area surrounding Emfuleni, the Vaal Triangle, downstream to Parys, and further on down to the Orange River.
Okay. Look, it's really a threat to all of us. And I think one of the things that OUTA has done is try to bring it to the forefront. What else can we do?
Well, I think it's very important that we keep the pressure on, we keep the pressure on the provincial government, the national government, and this is what we are doing. We are engaging with them. We are in communication with them. But as you know, the last resort is litigation, and at some stage we might be forced to go to court and force them to comply.
Yes. All right. Michael, thank you so much for making the time to speak to us. How can people get a hold of you?
Okay, what you do is, for further information, is you go to our website, www.outa.co.za, and On that website, you'll find our contact numbers, but there's also a tab for municipalities. Click on the tab, see what we're doing in local government, and hopefully we hear from you.
Any parting words on your side?
What I'd like to say is to all the supporters out there, thank you so much. And it's important for everybody to know that OUTA Local Government Division is fighting to turn local municipalities around to provide services to all communities.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael, for your time. After the break, we speak to Dominique and get into the SASSA debate.
Live from 27 boxes in the heart of Melville, this is brandlive.co.za.
Less tax abuse, more transparency. Stay tuned to Inside OUTA.
Thank you for staying tuned. We speak to Dominique Msibi on the South African grant distribution, moving from CPS to the South African Post Office. Dominique, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Great. Dominique, let's get into it. In 2017, OUTA offered its support to Freedom Under Law's bid to see Cash Paymaster as a distributor of social grants replaced with a distributor that's firstly legal and secondly more affordable. That bid was successful, and as of the 1st of October 2018, the South African Post Office has taken over the distribution of 600 million beneficiaries. 8 months after South African Post Office negotiated a cheaper price, its price has doubled. Are we seeing a case of an organization that didn't realize the magnitude of its work?
I would say that that would possibly be one of the factors, and realistically one of the only factors, because they did not realize, and I don't think they were adequately prepared for the work that they were getting into. I mean, we know how long it took to actually get the agreement between SASSA and SAPO going, and even in that agreement, afterwards, it still came out that there was not enough detail in the agreement for them to actually prepare adequately.
One of the concerns around the SASSA distribution is that credit providers are stationing themselves next to grant distribution centers, offering loans at 30% interest. This is actually taking advantage of the elderly and the disadvantaged who depend on their grants month by month, in my opinion. What is your stance on this?
Firstly, I would just like to highlight that it is a concern, yes, generally, if credit providers do that. However, in the instances that we have proof on, it is actually Net1 that is offering the loans. And Net1 is the mother company of CPS.
Oh, wow.
So we are seeing that CPS still tries to take advantage of the vulnerable, because what they do when they offer these loans, or that was until the end of September, we would like to know, first of all, going into the future, whether or not they continue that practice from the 1st of October, when they're supposed not to have any interactions with beneficiaries. One thing. However, the rates at which they're offering these loans are completely ridiculous. That kind of lending is reckless lending, and it is being perpetuated by a company that would be very knowledgeable regarding the vulnerability of these people and the impact that such practices have on the people. So absolutely, they are taking advantage of it, and they could possibly be unlawful. And they are promoting that our vulnerable people be perpetually indebted to them, because they will give you a loan that is equivalent to your SASSA grant, add 30% to that, and God knows what the terms of repayment are. We haven't yet been able to uncover that.
Okay. One of the other concerns is that former Social Development Minister Damini, Reese, was recently ordered by the Concord to pay 20% of her legal costs due to the SASSA debacle. Some people may call that a victory. Do you see that as a victory for grant beneficiaries and Black Sash?
Absolutely not, on both legs of your question. I do not see it as an advantage for the disadvantaged or the vulnerable. I can't possibly make the link of how that would advantage them, and I'll get to that when I get to the proportion that is being required from Batabile. Secondly, for the same reasons, basically, it would not be a victory, at least not a complete victory to Black Sash. If you look at the rest of the judgment, she is going to be held liable for 20% only. The rest of the 80% is going to be spread between the then CEO of SASSA, the current Minister of Social Development, and SASSA as an organization. I do not see how those people can be liable. I'll start with the CEO and SASSA themselves. They were under her leadership. She made the decisions. Yes, they may have, and they did, we know, go along with her plan. But it was under her reign, under her tenure, under her leadership. And as for the current minister, Susan Shabangu, I do not quite understand why she would be held liable, because she walked into a ready-made disaster. So I have no understanding of how that could possibly happen. 20% for Batabile, who is the engineer of everything that's gone wrong at SASSA, who was instructed by the Constitutional Court on several occasions to correct the mess that she was busy creating. But she chose, obviously, to flout the highest court in the land. I personally, and I would think a lot of South Africans would think that is just 20% is not enough. It's a slap on the wrist.
What did OUTA bring to the table in supporting Black Sash in this bid?
We brought a lot of collaborative work in terms of monitoring the implementations of the judgments that came about because of Black Sash's application to the ConCourt. We collaborated in terms of OUTA would monitor the outcome of those judgments and continuously monitor whether they were implemented or not. And then we would put out regular press releases to air our concerns with regards to how the minister was conducting herself as a result of these judgments, as a result of the inquiry that revealed that she actually consciously and very deliberately introduced this parallel work stream that worked against her own department. So with that kind of awareness, people then realized what she actually was doing. We also provided some information to the Black Sash that to Black Sash that OUTA had and continued to receive based on their application. So I would very much say that we just worked collaboratively and very transparently between the two organizations, Black Sash and OUTA, in that we sent them everything that we could get hold of. They still continue to send us, OUTA, me, everything that they get in terms of the judgment, in terms of the way forward, in terms of how the whole thing with SAPO is rolling out. So it's been so far and continues to be a very fruitful collaboration.
That's very impressive, especially because NGOs, we're seeing this spirit of NGOs working together, trying to bring about a change. And it's not about setting their own agendas, but it's definitely trying to push an agenda for the better of the country.
Absolutely. The other point that I wanted to make, thanks for pointing that out, is one of the benefits of OUTA being so intimately involved with another NGO, such as Black Sash, brings to the fore the fact that civil society is exceedingly supportive of any activity that results in the most vulnerable of our people being taken advantage of. We have become the voice of civil society in this particular context and many others.
That's very impressive. Talking about the vulnerable, Oxfam did a report last year, 24 years post-democracy and post-apartheid. The inequality gap in South Africa continues to grow. In South Africa, we remain one of the highest countries with the biggest gap in inequality. The report goes on to say that 1% of our country's riches own 42% of total wealth, a staggering percentage that needs urgent attention. What steps, in your opinion, do you think should be taken to reduce the economic inequality in South Africa?
Everyone in South Africa and globally keep acknowledging that this gap exists.
Sure.
It's about time that we see some actions to reduce the gap.
Absolutely.
Such things as job creation being prioritized to address the needs of the previously disadvantaged and currently disadvantaged. One of the keys to that would be equal education.
Yes.
One of the keys would be a concerted and realistic drive to provide skills to the millions of unemployed youth in South Africa. Let them be players in the economy going forward because they are our future leaders. I listened to the president's speech and statement and what he had to say at the recent job summit that was held about 2 weeks ago.
Yes.
It was very nice to listen to the words of the gentleman articulate himself regarding this job summit. But I came away from watching the entire speech with a feeling of how. You're speaking all the right words, Mr. President. However, you're not telling us what the concrete action plan is to achieve all of the things that you speak about.
Sure. Wow. Sure. This has been such an informative interview, Dominique. I really appreciate your time. What words do you have to say for those beneficiaries of SASSA? What is the step? What is the next step forward?
To the beneficiaries, I can only ask for tenacity, because they have no control over what's happening to them. Not only tenacity, the reality is they cannot walk away and focus on fighting, because the very little grants that they get are what they depend on to live from day to day.
Yeah.
And the other realization that people that have control over the situation need to click to is the fact that if a grandmother receives a pension of 1,900 rand, she's not only going to support herself with that pittance, she is possibly supporting an extended family of 10 people. How do you spread 1,900 rand meaningfully among 10 individuals? It boggles my mind how people can go to sleep at night knowing that they are responsible for that kind of scenario. Yet their public offices are meant to be reducing the pain, reducing the indignity of this 17 million people that we speak about.
Thank you so much for your time, Dominique. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Harnessing the power of talk radio. brandlive.co.za.
Less corruption, more accountability. Stay tuned to Inside OUTA.
If you'd like to re-listen to this interview, visit us on our website, www.outa.co.za. And join us next week as we start our series on how the media plays a role in perpetuating stereotypes. I'm your host, Bernadette Bule. I look forward to continuing our conversation.
Thanks for listening to Inside OUTA. Tune in next week when we delve deeper into undoing tax abuse.
Live from 27 boxes in the heart of Melville, this is brandlive.co.za.